By 7:32 p.m. Eastern on a humid Tuesday evening in late March, Jasmine Crockett had already been awake for 19 hours. She had flown from Dallas to New York that morning for what Fox News producers had described as a routine panel discussion on congressional oversight. What they had not told her, what she discovered only when her phone lit up with text messages from 3 different colleagues 40 minutes before airtime, was that the network had spent the previous 72 hours promoting the segment as a confrontation. The Chiron they had prepared read, "AOC protege faces real questions." The promotional clips featured a montage of her most passionate floor speeches, edited to remove all context, set to ominous music with the word radical appearing in red letters over her face. She sat alone in the green room, her navy blazer perfectly pressed, reviewing notes on her iPad, while a production assistant hovered near the door, checking his watch every 30 seconds. On the monitor mounted to the wall, she could see the panel being assembled in studio. 3 men, no other women. The host was already smirking at something one of the panelists had said off camera. This was the tales. This was the moment when most guests would feel the first flutter of doubt, the instinct to soften their positions before the cameras went live, to prepare defenses rather than offenses. Jasmine Crockett opened a second folder on her iPad and began scrolling through a document she had prepared 6 weeks earlier, a document no one at Fox News knew existed. The segment began exactly as the network had designed it to begin. The host, a man whose entire career had been built on the appearance of reasonable curiosity masking absolute certainty, introduced her as freshman Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing Texas's 30th district, joining us tonight to defend her party's record on border security. The emphasis on freshman and defend were not accidental. The other 3 panelists were identified by their credentials and accomplishments. She was identified by her inexperience and her presumed defensiveness. The camera found her face just in time to catch her polite smile. "Congresswoman," the host began, leaning forward with the posture of a teacher addressing a struggling student, "you've been in Congress for just over a year now. You've made quite a few headlines with your speeches on the House floor, very passionate speeches, very emotional speeches. But I'm curious, and I think our viewers are curious, when when you're done, with the speeches and the viral clips, what have you actually accomplished on the single most important issue facing your state? We've had more illegal border crossings in the last 18 months than in the previous 4 years combined. Your party controls the Senate. You have the White House, and yet the border remains wide open. How do you explain that failure to the families in Texas who are dealing with the consequences every single day?" The question was designed to do 3 things simultaneously. It dismissed her entire congressional record as performance rather than substance. It framed the issue in language that presumed guilt, failure, and wide open and illegal. And it demanded she answer for decisions made by people who outranked her by decades, while simultaneously reminding the audience that she was too junior to have real authority. It was a masterpiece of rhetorical contempt. Jasmine Crockett did not respond immediately. She let the silence extend for 3 full seconds while she placed her iPad on the table in front of her with the care of someone handling evidence at trial. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than anyone expected, softer, almost gentle. "That's an interesting way to frame the question," she said. "Before I answer it, I want to make sure we're working from the same set of facts. You said we've had more illegal border crossings in the last 18 months than in the previous 4 years. Is that the number you're standing by? More in 18 months than in the previous 4 years?" The host blinked once. His smile widened. Those are the numbers from Customs and Border Protection, Congresswoman. Those are the official government numbers, your government's numbers. I just want to make sure," she said, still in that same gentle tone, "because we're on national television and I wouldn't want there to be any confusion later about what was said. You're stating on the record that CBP data shows more encounters in the last 18 months than in the 4 years prior. Is that correct?" One of the panelists, Amy Ari, a former ICE official whose consulting firm had contracts with 3 Republican governors, laughed. Actually laughed. "Is she trying to cross-examine you, Bill? This isn't a courtroom, Congresswoman. This is pretty simple stuff. More people coming across illegally equals bad border security. That's not a complicated equation. And so saying me, Z-May, she turned her head to look at him directly. Her expression did not change. I'm just establishing the factual basis for the conversation. If we can't agree on the numbers, we can't have a productive discussion. So I'll ask one more time. Are we saying that CBP encounter data for the last 18 months exceeds the total for the 4 years before that? The host's smile was beginning to look slightly fixed. Yes. That is what the data shows. Perfect, Jasmine Crockett said. She tapped her iPad once because I have the actual CBP data here. Fiscal year 2020 through fiscal year 2023 monthly encounter reports, every single one. And what those reports actually show is that total encounters for the 18-month period you're referencing, January 2023 through June 2024, numbered approximately 2 million. The 4 years prior, 2019 through 2022, totaled just over 8 million encounters. So the number you just stated on national television, the number you said came from CPB, is off by a factor of more than 2. It's not close to accurate. It's the opposite of accurate. The silence that followed was immediate and total. The host's hand, which had been gesturing casually toward the camera, froze in midair. The former ICE official's face underwent a color change visible even under studio lighting, from its standard television tan to something approaching salmon. In the control room, someone made a decision not to cut away. The cameras held on the panel. 5 seconds. 7, 10. Now, she continued, her voice still carrying that same measured gentleness. I assume that was an honest mistake. Numbers can be complicated. So let me help clarify the actual situation at the border, because if we're going to have this conversation, we should have it based on what's real. She turned her iPad so the camera could see it. On the screen was a CBP chart showing monthly encounters with a clearly marked trend line. What this data actually shows is that encounters peaked in December of 2023 at about 250,000. That was the highest single month in recorded history. I'm not disputing that. But by June of 2024, that number had fallen to 83,000. That's a 67% decrease in 6 months. The current month, March 2025, is tracking at about 71,000. So over the 15-month period we're actually living in right now, the trend is sharply downward, not up, down. The host attempted to interrupt, but Congresswoman, I'm not finished, she said. The words were not loud. They were not harsh, but they landed with absolute finality. You asked me what I've accomplished. So I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you using the same official data you claim to be citing. She opened a second document. In January of this year, I introduced H.R. 1247, the Border Processing and Asylum Accountability Act. That bill does 5 specific things. First, it allocates $3 billion for additional CBP personnel to reduce processing times at ports of entry from an average of 14 hours to under 4. Second, it mandates biometric tracking for 100% of asylum applicants with check-ins every 30 days instead of every 6 months. Third, it creates a funded pathway for asylum cases to be adjudicated within 90 days instead of the current average of 4 years. Fourth, it establishes penalties for employers who hire undocumented workers, $50,000 per violation, no exceptions. And fifth, it requires cooperation agreements with Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador with specific benchmarks tied to foreign aid disbursements. She looked up from the iPad. That bill currently has 127 co-sponsors. It has been endorsed by the National Sheriff's Association, the Border Patrol Union, and 3 separate immigration law organizations. It passed out of committee on a bipartisan vote of 24-11. Do you know where that bill is right now? No one answered. The former ICE official was looking at something on his phone under the table. The third panelist, who had not yet spoken, appeared to be hoping the cameras would forget he existed. Masana, so it is sitting on the House floor. She's earning and seeing mount, she said, because the speaker will not bring it to a vote. And do you know why the speaker will not bring it to a vote? Because he has stated on the record that he will not advance any immigration legislation that does not include full funding for a border wall, not barriers, not technology, not personnel, a physical concrete wall, which every single CBP sector chief has testified is less effective than a combination of technology, personnel, and targeted physical barriers in high traffic urban areas. The experts don't want a wall. They want resources. My bill gives them resources, and it is being blocked by the very same party that just spent the last 6 minutes accusing me of not doing anything about the border. She paused. 3 seconds of silence. The only sound in the studio was someone's phone vibrating against the desk. Now, she said, you mentioned families in Texas dealing with consequences. So let's talk about actual families. Let's talk about Maria Gonzalez. Maria is a constituent of mine. She lives in Dallas. She has lived there for 16 years. She owns a small restaurant. She employs 11 people. She pays $127,000 a year in payroll taxes. Her daughter graduated from Southern Methodist University last year with a degree in chemical engineering. Maria came here on a visa when she was 19. That visa expired. She applied for renewal. The renewal was denied due to a paperwork error her lawyer made. She has been trying to fix that error for 14 years. 14 years. Her case has been continued 23 times. 23 times she has taken a day off work, driven to the immigration court in downtown Dallas, sat in a waiting room for 6 hours, and been told to come back in 6 months because the court is backlogged. Her voice remained absolutely level. My bill would resolve Maria's case in 90 days. 90 days instead of 14 years, because the current system is not designed to work. It is designed to punish people for existing in a bureaucratic nightmare that no human being could successfully navigate. And when people like Maria are forced to live in legal limbo for over a decade, when they cannot travel to see dying parents, cannot apply for better jobs, cannot plan their lives more than 6 months in advance, that is not border security. That is cruelty pretending to be policy. The host tried again. With all due respect, Congresswoman, one anecdote doesn't, Maria is not an anecdote, she said. The temperature in her voice dropped 20 degrees without rising in volume by a single decibel. Maria is a human being. She is one of 11 million human beings living in this country without documentation. And the reason there are 11 million people in that situation is not because the border is wide open. It is because Congress has not passed comprehensive immigration reform in 40 years. Not under Republicans, not under Democrats. 40 years. And every single time a serious bill gets introduced in 2007, in 2013, in 2021, and now in 2025 with my bill, it dies because one party decides that it is more politically useful to keep the problem alive than to solve it. She opened a third document. Let me show you what I mean by that. In 2013, the Senate passed the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act, bipartisan vote, 68 to 32. 14 Republicans voted for it. The bill included $46 billion for border security. It required 90% effectiveness rates at high traffic sectors before any legalization could begin. It created the toughest border security package in American history, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Do you know what happened to that bill? The silence was back. The host was looking at his notes. The notes were not helping him. The Republican-controlled House refused to bring it to a vote. She said, the speaker at the time said it was dead on arrival. He did not offer amendments. He did not negotiate. He killed it because the actual policy outcome was never the goal. The goal was to make sure the issue remained unresolved so it could be used in the next election and the next one and the next one. Which brings us to tonight. She closed the iPad cover with a soft snap. You invited me here to defend my party's record on border security, but I don't need to defend anything because my party just passed border funding increases in the last budget resolution. My party introduced the bill I just described that would actually fix the processing crisis. My party has proposed pathways that balance security with human dignity. And my party's bills keep dying because your preferred political leaders have made a calculated decision that solving the problem would cost them their most reliable campaign issue. So when you ask me what I've accomplished in just over a year in Congress, the answer is that I've done my job. I've written legislation, I've built coalitions, I've passed bills out of committee, and I've shown up to every single vote ready to support real solutions. She leaned forward slightly. What I'm still waiting for is for the people who have been in Congress for 20 and 30 years, the people who have had the power to fix this for decades, to do the same. The host opened his mouth. No sound came. He looked down at his notes again, flipped a page, looked back up. 12 seconds. 15, The former ICE official coughed into his fist. The third panelist was now openly scrolling on his phone. Finally, the host found words. We're going to take a quick break, he said. His voice had changed. The casual confidence was gone. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion with, actually, Jasmine Crockett said, I have one more thing to add before we break. The host looked toward the control room. Someone off camera made a decision. The host nodded. Go ahead, Congresswoman. You started this segment by calling my floor speeches emotional. You said they were very passionate, very emotional. I want to address that for a moment because I think it's important when I stand on the House floor and I talk about families being separated, when I talk about children being held in detention facilities, when I talk about people dying in the desert because our asylum process is so broken that they risk their lives rather than wait years for an appointment. Yes, I speak with passion because those situations are worth being passionate about. They are worth caring about. And the fact that you describe caring about human suffering as a weakness rather than a strength tells me everything I need to know about why these problems have not been solved. She stood. The movement was not dramatic. It was simply done. She unplugged her microphone with one hand while holding her iPad in the other. I was told this was going to be a serious policy discussion. She said, I prepared for a serious policy discussion. I brought data. I brought legislation. I brought real stories from real constituents. What I got instead was a setup designed to make me look inexperienced and emotional while three men asked me to defend failures that are not mine. So I'm going to leave now. And when your viewers ask why the segment ended early, you can tell them that the freshman congresswoman from Texas had better things to do than sit here and be condescended to by people who cannot be bothered to learn the actual facts about the issue they claim to care about most. She walked off the set. The cameras did not follow her. They held on the panel, on three men sitting in complete silence, on a host whose notes were suddenly useless, on an empty chair where moments before a woman they had dismissed as too young and too emotional had systematically dismantled every claim they had made. The studio cut to commercial at 7:51 p.m. 19 minutes after the segment had begun. The control room would later report that the decision to cut was made because the host had frozen completely and showed no signs of recovering. In the 18 seconds between her exit and the commercial break, no one on the panel spoke. The silence was absolute. By 8:07 p.m., a clip of the segment was trending on Twitter. By 9:30 p.m., it had 3 million views. By midnight, it had been shared across Facebook and WhatsApp by exactly the demographic Fox News had spent 30 years cultivating: older Americans who had watched the network religiously and who were now watching something they had not expected to see. Someone prepared, someone with receipts, someone who had done the homework while everyone else was performing. The clip that went most viral was not the moment she presented the CBP data. It was not the moment she described Maria Gonzalez. It was the silence. The 12 seconds after she asked what happened to the 2013 bill. The moment when three men who made their living talking could not find a single word to say. In the comments, thousands of viewers noted the same thing. She never raised her voice. She never showed anger. She remained composed while they fell apart. And in green rooms across every cable news network in America, producers began quietly updating their internal notes about which guests could and could not be controlled, which interviews were worth booking, and which represented unacceptable risk. Jasmine Crockett's name moved to a different list, not the list of easy targets. The list of people who came prepared. At 11:43 p.m. that same night, she posted a single tweet. When they question your qualifications, bring your receipts. When they question your passion, bring your policy. And when they try to make you look small, remember that facts don't require volume. They just require truth. The tweet received 847,000 likes in 6 hours. She had been called emotional at the beginning of that broadcast. She had been dismissed as a freshman who spoke with too much passion and too little substance. But by the time the cameras cut to commercial, she had done something no amount of passion or emotion could have accomplished. She had made three men who built careers on confident dismissal sit in absolute silence because they had not done the work, had not checked the facts, had not prepared for the possibility that the young woman they invited to embarrass might instead expose them. That silence said everything. It said that arrogance is not preparation. It said that contempt is not competence. It said that when you underestimate someone because of their age or their gender or the length of their tenure, you do not make them smaller, you make yourself vulnerable. And Jasmine Crockett had been waiting for exactly that vulnerability. She had been waiting for 19 hours for 6 weeks. For every single day since she had first been told that, passion and emotion were weaknesses instead of the fuel that drives people to do the work no one else wants to do. The segment was supposed to last 30 minutes. It lasted 19. The network spent the next 3 days refusing to comment on why it had ended early, but everyone who watched knew it ended because she walked off. And she walked off because she had already won.